Hello and welcome to the Love Henry podcast produced by the Henri Nouwen Society. My name's Wendy Vanderwall Martin, and I'm part of the team that seeks to encourage spiritual transformation through the work and legacy of Henri Nouwen. Now, if you're a longtime Henry fan, welcome back. We hope that you're getting our free daily meditations. But if you're new to Henri Nouwen, we encourage you to check out our website, henrinouwen.org. Check out all of our programs and resources, but especially that free daily meditation, where every day you'll get a reminder that you are the beloved of God. Now, this morning, I'm thrilled to welcome David Hayward, also known as the Naked Pastor, a longtime friend, and so looking forward to our conversation. Thanks, David, for being with us.
Thanks, Wendy. It's good to see you this morning, and thanks for having me on your show today.
Well, I see your paintings behind you, and I have one right in front of me. That was my birthday gift from my husband. So
Yeah.
we're surrounded by your art this morning. Now, for those of you who might not have encountered David, he is a pastor turned artist, painting, drawing, and thinking about what it takes to be free, to be fully you. Something Henry really cared about, the true self. Now, as you can see, he isn't actually naked, but the idea behind the name is to seek to tell the naked truth, no matter how vulnerable it feels. And as someone who has followed his art for many years, I can attest to that, especially his Sunday morning series, which perhaps he'll tell you more about later. Now, through his art and daring to ask and be mostly comfortable with hard questions, David's been caring for online community for more than 10 years, maybe even more than that, David. And at one point that was called The Lasting Supper, but we're going to dive into that and hear more about what is making you passionate about your work these days.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Yeah.
So what gets you up in the morning? What makes you the most excited to face the day and offer yourself to the world?
Well, that's an interesting question because I like to wake up each morning and I make the decision to be helpful. I want to be helpful. And, I go about my morning routines, which is, a mixture of meditation, stretching, breathing, coffee, exercise, all that stuff. But a part of it is uh, breathing in joy and exhaling love. And that sounds really corny, kind of cheesy, but that is I really do that every morning. And because I want to be a happy person that loves other people and helps them along in their own spiritual journeys. So and in their own endeavor to be free to be their authentic selves. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
Well, that's wonderful to hear you say that. I've often used the exercise where I'm inhaling that which I long for, and I'm exhaling kind of all the crud that I want to get rid of. So, I might inhale joy, but exhale discouragement. But I love the idea of inhaling joy and then exhaling love. Like I am a conduit for all that is positive and good for the world. So, yeah,
Yeah, we are.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now, this is a podcast produced by the Henri Nouwen Society. So, of course, I'm going to ask you, how did you encounter Henry and what impact did he have on your life?
Okay, this is a pivotal point in my life. This is an important chapter in my own spiritual journey. Meeting Henri Nouwen, not face to face, but through one of his books. And this happened decades ago when I was graduating from seminary. Um, I was a young man in my, mid-20s, and I had up to that point taken the totally I was going to be a biblical scholar. So I had taken biblical Greek, biblical Hebrew, I even took a year of Aramaic. There's only one chapter in the whole Bible that's in Aramaic, but I took Aramaic, started studying theological French, theological German, so I could become a biblical scholar. I was accepted into the PhD program for New Testament studies at University of Toronto. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I'm telling you that just to give you an indication where my brain was at. And it was just totally kind of an analytical, biblical studies kind of a person. And then when I was graduating, a friend of mine at the seminary gave me a gift, and it was a book. And he was in the pastoral stream at the seminary. I was in the biblical study stream. He was in the academic scholar stream,
Super heady.
right? And he was in the pastoral stream, MDiv, and so on. And he gave me a book, and I glanced at it, and my attitude about the book was more of that new age spiritual gobbledygook kind of stuff. And I hardly even cracked it. I didn't read it or anything. That was all in the realm of spirituality, which I had no interest in at that time. I mean, even as I say that now, it was like really weird because I'm totally not that way anymore. But at that time, it was like no biblical studies, and this book I just sort of packed away. And so after we were graduated and all that, I packed all my things, and I ended up going to serve as an assistant pastor in a church in Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown. I was an assistant to the pastor there at Zion Presbyterian Church, big Presbyterian church. And, I was still there in my head. And I was even when I was preparing messages or whatever I was doing sermons, I studied the Greek Bible, did all the exegesis, all the commentaries. And it was in the winter. Here's where the story begins. That's just the backdrop, just to give you an indication of where I was at mentally, spiritually, all in my head. So it was in the winter, and part of the ministry of the church there was we would give food out, like canned food, non-perishables, to unhoused people. And they would come in. They knew we had a food bank there, and we would give out stuff. So this was Friday. There was a storm warning. There was a big snowstorm coming, and the snow had already started. And here, the secretary messaged me, David, there's a person at the door wanting food. And I'm like, oh, geez. I was trying to get things ready to get home before we got snowed in. And so I came out, and this guy was obviously inebriated somehow and wanted food. And I was like impatient. I needed to get home before, I got stuck there, because we lived a little bit out in the country. And I put my arm around his shoulder, and I escorted him to the door, and I said, you come back sober and we'll talk. And I kind of rushed him out into this street. He was walking down the steps. He says, oh, come on, can't you help a poor fellow out? And I'm like, no, you come back sober and we'll get you some groceries. And he was going down the steps, and he turned around, and he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, you'll never be a pastor the way you treated me today. And it was like he just shoved a knife into my heart. And I realized, like, I realized how calloused and cruel and unfeeling and, all stuck in my head and all had no heart. And I was devastated. I went back to my study, and I was bawling. I couldn't believe I'd done that to someone. Anyway, I packed up, got my car, drove home, and I was just devastated. I shared with Lisa, my wife, what had happened. I felt like the meaning of life was gone. I'd lost my footing completely, completely, totally destroyed. And in the evening, so the snowstorm had started. We were definitely getting snowed in. And for those of you who don't know what snowed in means, it means so much snow that you can't leave the house. The roads are closed, everything. And a friend of mine called, from Boston. So I went to seminary in Boston, and here we are up in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. A friend from Boston called and said, "Hey, Dave, you wouldn't believe," this is back when we had landlines. He said, "You wouldn't believe who I just heard today." I go, "Who?" And he says, "Henri Nouwen." I said, "Henri Nouwen? I don't know who that is." He said, "Well, he's a professor at Harvard, and spiritual formation is his specialty, blah, blah, blah." And uh, he said, it was amazing. It blew my mind, this speech he gave. And he shared a little bit about the talk and all that. And I'm listening, and all the whole while I'm thinking, Henri Nouwen, like what? And so after we talked, hung up, I said, "Gary just told me about Henri Nouwen. Where do I know that name?" And he said, "Didn't somebody give you a book when you graduated by that Henri Nouwen?" And so I didn't know. So we went looking in our boxes that were all packed and everything, books, boxes of books. And I found this book that had been given to me on my graduation. It was by Henri Nouwen, and it was called Reaching Out. And I devoured that book over the weekend. And I've been journaling now for a while, but I was journaling this whole through the book. And it was just what I needed at that very moment. Just exactly what I needed at that moment. And it it caused a, a huge transformation in my life reading that book. Because from there, I was inspired and motivated to look for like people like Thomas Merton and other mystics. I started looking for a spiritual director, and I eventually found one who was a nun in a local monastery, and so on and so forth. It just totally changed the trajectory of my life. That one that one thing. It was like a a divine intervention, you know. That's what it really did feel that way. So that was my first experience of Henri Nouwen. And, you know, from there, like he introduced me to a whole new world. And, you know, then that book, I don't consider that his best book, but it eventually led me to his best book, in my opinion, which is Wounded Healer. And that really, if anybody were to ask me, what is the number one book that influenced the way you pastor? It would be that book. And it, yeah, it just totally changed my life. And I have Henri Nouwen to thank for that. So that's my story. That's my Henri Nouwen story.
You know, I've been with the society for about a year now, and Henry had a huge impact on me as well as a young person. And
Mhm.
I have a lot of his books. They were very important to me. But like many of us, perhaps it had been a while since I'd done a really deep dive into Henry Nouwen's writing. Of course, when
Right.
I took this role, I was excited to re-encounter Nouwen, but a little part of me wondered, will it will it feel the same? You know, I'm a very different person. I've journeyed, and
Yeah.
what's been really beautiful is how much I have just been grateful to re encounter Henry Nouwen at this stage and place in my journey. I've had some ups and downs, like all of us do, some deep hurts
Mhm.
since my early years with Nouwen.
Mhm.
And there is just this deep heart of Henry. And that's timeless, you know, whether we're in the 80s or the 90s or now, you know, years, decades later, our hearts need to connect and to press through the personas, right?
Yeah.
Henry was ruthlessly honest and
Yeah.
rigorously vulnerable, which I know has become such an important practice for you in
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
art. And I remember the blogging years, and you had comments on your cartoons, but
Yeah.
your Sophia series as well of charcoal drawings. And you've corresponded with people for years. You respond to people's comments, people connect with you. And Henri kept up correspondence as a daily discipline, which this was before email, before blogs. It wasn't online. He sat at his desk and wrote letters. Apparently there's 16,000 letters in the archives now.
Wow.
And I don't know. I mean, Henri was very open. A lot of his journals ended up being published. So maybe he wouldn't be surprised to know that his letters have also been published into a book called Love Henri, which is why the podcast is called Love Henri. And the concept is kind of to take a letter of Henri's written decades ago and to see how it reads to us today, to connect Henri to today. So this letter arises from one of his many speaking requests where he couldn't go to be with them. And so he's written to this denominational group with these words in March 1991. He says, "Dear friends, you're gathering at your April meeting, and I want to express to you my great regret that I'll not be able to be with you. I'm spending the month of April in Germany to do some writing." I should look up and see what book it was he was working on then. But anyway, Brian asked me to send you a few words to encourage you in your work and to assure you of my great desire to be connected with you. Such a huge theme for Henri. As I think of the words that are your theme for your gathering, I realize how much I identify with these words. The longer I live in the ministry, the more I feel the call to become weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, broken with the broken. My life with people who have a mental handicap, today we would say intellectual disability, has confronted me more and more with my own handicaps, my own weaknesses, and my own brokenness. But the more I was willing to be confronted in a gentle, loving way, the more I discovered that God indeed chose to dwell where we can come together in a fellowship of the weak. There was a time when I really wanted to help the poor, the sick, the broken, but to do it as one who was wealthy, healthy, and strong. Now I see more and more how it is precisely through my weakness and brokenness that I minister to others. I am increasingly aware of the fact that Jesus does not say, "Blessed are those who help the poor," but "Blessed are the poor." For me, this means that I have to come in touch with my own poverty to discover there the blessings of God and to minister from that place to others. It is only as the blessed ones that we can be a blessing for others. And I pray that we all dare to claim the blessing that rests in our poverty, our weakness, our non-togetherness, and that we can proclaim to others that where they are broken and in great need, the voice of God's love can often be heard. It's clear we need to heal. It is clear we need to protest against violence and injustice. It is clear we have to do anything possible to avoid oppression, exploitation, and war. But this ministry of healing has to be a ministry in the name of the one who healed through his wounds and who revealed his healing presence as the crucified one, who took the marks of his crucifixion into his new life with God. So I pray that you embrace your own weakness and your own suffering and your own pain with the trust that in this way you can follow your Lord and make your own wounds a source of healing for others. Thus, you can also become a true light for the world and a sign of hope and a prophetic voice that calls for peace and justice. Your brother in Christ, Henri Nouwen.
Powerful. Yeah.
Right? He just stands the test of time. Tell me, David, what resonates as you even now just listen to me read this letter?
Well, it's that same theme of wounded healer, right? It's I think that book, even though it's like a Penguin pocketbook kind of a thing, it's very tiny, but it packs a punch, and it's the same with that letter. But it's strange to use that term, packs a punch, when we're talking about weakness and so on. But yeah, it's just powerful. That's what so I read Nouwen very, very early in my ministry. And that was way back when I started as in my trajectory as a pastor. That started way back then. And he is in the foundations of my pastoral values and philosophies and ideas and practice. And even though I left the ministry of a local congregation in 2010, I still feel I'm doing the work kind of as a pastor online. I kind of stole Wesley's little sayings that the world is now my parish
Mhm.
instead of one little local congregation. And so he's really totally influenced the way I think about serving, being a pastor. And as time went on, though, when I became more and more familiar with Henri Nouwen, seeing that he was wrestling with his own stuff and um, accepting his own self and his own struggling to be, like you said, his authenticity, his vulnerability and transparency uh, was such a model for me that and I think what's powerful about that, and I often think about this, like what came first, his need to be vulnerable and trying to make God somehow fit that, or did he have a huge, limitless idea of God's love and grace, and that provided the space for him to be his most vulnerable and authentic self. And I think that's what has inspired me all the way through. And that, even in that letter that you just read, his it's almost like it's almost like constantly risk taking of being his most authentic self, most vulnerable and honest. And with the sort of the presumption that it's okay, that he's okay, that we're okay. Do you understand what maybe I'm being as clear as mud here, but it seems to me like his understanding of God's love and grace allowed him to be as authentic as he was.
I have to wonder if it's a bit of both and, right? I
Yeah,
think I think his great need drew him to God in it's kind of a really really stressful point in my life. I remember the I just clung to this tiny phrase from the Psalms, whom have I in heaven but you? Like I'm at the end of my rope.
right.
Like I might as well try you. Like I just and not even that, but like if you're not there, nothing's going to help me. And
Yeah,
I think we see that in Henry.
yeah,
And we see in Henry that he found the lover of his soul. He
mm,
found the one who called him beloved no matter what. Didn't
yeah,
matter what he did, didn't matter what he thought, didn't matter how anxious he was, didn't matter how driven he was, even though he wrote about silence and solitude, you know, that he was called beloved. And it was the yin yang of both of those things. His great new need drew him to God, but then the God he found was this eternal, complete, unconditional lover. And I think that's why he became so embracing and inclusive.
yeah.
Once in a while, we'll get an email into the society that says, was Henry, what's the word I'm looking for? Shoot, David, what's the word where everyone goes to heaven?
Universalism?
Universalist.
Okay.
Uh, once in a while, we'll get an email into the ministry that says, was Henry a universalist? And it's sort of like the question asks about a position,
Right,
but for Henry, it was about relationship.
right.
And the God he encountered was a God that loved beyond our imagination.
Yeah,
And so, of course, our dream of this God is that all are embraced.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like the way you said that. It is that profound dynamic of his need and also the permission that was given for him to be his authentic self with the expansiveness of his idea of God's grace and God's love. I think those two created a powerful dynamic. It's kind of like it made him such a great soul,
Mm.
like great as in huge. And obviously impacted so many people in the world.
Yeah, and of course,
Very many
Henry.
people. I don't know very many people really who are that vulnerable
Mm,
publicly.
mm.
It's not cool, you
Well,
know?
and think of when he was doing it, right? This is
Yeah,
decades ago. So,
yeah.
you know, the whole idea of my narrative and my experience can be trusted and matters. And it's one of the ways in which, I mean, in a lot of church circles, uh, that was very revolutionary.
Hmm.
Um, Now, Henry, of course, studied psychology. And so one might think, well, his awareness of psychology and how our emotions and spirit commingle, maybe that was part of why he was the way he was. Um, or I'd like to get back to this. I think Henry's soul was the soul of an artist. I
Uh-huh.
mean, when he speaks about Van Gogh, there's this connection there that draws out, you know, um, an emotive spirituality that inevitably, if you're going to be honest about that, takes you to a place of vulnerability. But I think a mystic is maybe born, right? Like there are just some people whose soul is drawn to an awareness of God, even if they don't know how to articulate that or have the language for that. Um, and it seems that through Henry's childhood, even there was this, he practiced giving the Eucharist to the neighborhood children. There, he just always had this draw to be a priest. And I don't think it was about a position in the church. I think there was this deep longing in Henry. And this is where I want to return to the arts, because I
Uh-huh.
think I've said recently, I think his book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, which is one of his most beloved books,
Hmm.
really is the fruit of a years long visio divina, where he just, the first time he saw Rembrandt's painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son, it captivated him. And
Yeah.
he was like obsessed with the work in the best sense of the word, where he just, entered it so mystically. And
Hmm.
you're an artist. So tell me about this place of the arts in, for having been such a heady guy who wanted to be a biblical scholar.
Yeah.
And I know you as an artist, someone who in
Yeah.
your cartoons you're sort of this critic, but in your paintings and in your charcoal drawings of Sophia especially, there's this mystical, emotive, deep listening and just responsiveness in your art that I think communicates something of spirit that goes far beyond the wordiness of,
Yeah.
of typical spoken language.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Um, I remember reading I Image Journal is a journal that deals with art and faith. And I remember I subscribed to it, and there was an article in there by Henry Nouwen
Mm-hmm.
where he was talking about a certain sculptor
Mm-hmm.
I think in the Toronto area. And I was fascinated by that he loved this guy's sculpture and he owned a couple of his pieces. And I thought, because I always thought of him as kind of like this mystical, spiritual kind of thing. And then here he is fascinated by the arts and then Rembrandt and, the Prodigal Son and all that kind of thing. And it reminded me of another experience I had while I was in Boston. We'd gone back to Boston to visit friends. This is after I'd had my what I call my, I don't know what I call that, the where everything changed. And I met Henri Nouwen in the book Reaching Out. But we went to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and we were touring through there, and it's fascinating. Of course, I love art. I've been painting all and drawing all my life, ever since I can remember. And so I love art. And we were going through, and there was a painting there by Merson, Merson, a French painter. Uh, and it's called The Holy Family in Egypt, I think, something like that. And it shows a sphinx. It's nighttime. I think there's a sliver of a moon, and very, very deep, 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 dark, dark, dark blues. And there's the sphinx. And in the there's a donkey on the desert floor standing, tethered, and a little campfire, and Joseph is sleeping by the campfire, and Mary, with Jesus in her arms, is cradled in between the legs of the Sphinx. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was so powerful. And for me, with that image, I just stood there and stared at it for like a couple hours. I'm serious. Like I just could not take my eyes off it. I ended up buying a poster of it, a print of the painting. I still have it. Because to me, what that communicated in just one image was the universality of the gospel, let's say, the good news. It's like it's in Egypt, it's everywhere. You know, that's what it communicated to me at the time. And just that how one image can so powerfully open up one's mind, or provide a different way of thinking or transformation. It was a transformational moment for me, just looking at that painting. And Henri Nouwen, of course, experienced the same thing with the Prodigal Son, Rembrandt's Prodigal Son, and so on. And yeah, I think that I took that lesson with me, and I do my paintings and I do my drawings, but with my cartoons, I try to convey in one picture as as much meaning as I can. Like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so if I can put a picture in front of somebody, and in one split second they get what I'm saying, and it can change their life, uh, then it's, to me, it proves the power of art. So, and I get the same thing from people with my Sophia images, and there's the Timber series, and my Images of Christ series, and my watercolors. Yeah, I did a watercolor recently, last year, um, of a person carrying a child through a snowstorm. And I called it Carrying My Inner Child to Safety. And I couldn't believe the response to that painting. To me, it was just, I was inspired to draw somebody carrying a child through a storm to safety. No, I'm going to call it Carrying My Inner Child to Safety. And oh my goodness, so many people wanted a print of it or something because it just spoke to them. And that's their experience. With one image, it captures how they're feeling about themselves, or whatever. So yeah,
Well,
long
you
answer
think about
to a short question.
you think about the artist who's trying to create a sense of meaning that is significant to them in their creation, and
Mhm.
then they may be saying even more than they know that they're saying, which I'll return to that phrase,
Yes.
because then as people interpret that piece of art, they bring their sense of meaning to it.
Yeah.
And it's more than the artist thought or imagined. Uh,
Yep.
Carolyn Ahrens, who's a musician songwriter, recently recorded for us our 2024 meditation series, and that's going to be released the Saturday mornings in September. And it is about the gift of the arts in spiritual formation.
Mm.
And she tells the story of playing a song, and it was a concert. And after they were packing up their gear, the janitor came over to them and said, when you were playing that song and the sunlight was coming through the window, you was saying even more than you knew you was saying. And Carolyn tells that story because I think there is this power when we, it sometimes happens with spoken language. You know, if you hear a poem,
Mm-hmm.
it can take you places that the poet didn't even imagine. You can hear music and it can take you places that the composer never imagined. And visual art, it can
Yeah.
take you places that the artist wasn't aware of. And so
Yeah.
the arts as a way of practicing opening ourselves up. One of the things about your art is that I think it frees people, people especially who've been bound up by religion.
Mm-hmm.
Want to say a bit more about that and the kind of folks who seem to be drawn to and connect to
Mm-hmm.
your art. Um, you know, we throw around a word like deconstruction, but tell us about that freeing, healing, releasing part of what is, I think, your current vocation.
Yeah. Can I just make share one insight about the where art is communal, like where I'm one of the players, but the observer is also a player. And that is, I'll give one example. So in my Sophia series, there's like 62 drawings. I have the book, The Liberation of Sophia, where they're all in there and each one has a meditation. But one of the images I call suspended. And so there's two evergreen trees and up against the moon. And in between these two trees is a hammock tied. And Sophia is lying in the hammock between these two trees against the full moon. And it's one of the most loved, you know, Sophia images. But I drew that, and you know, those images I drew over a period of 2 years. And I drew that though and shared it. And somebody pointed out, did you ever notice that one of the trees is alive and one is dead? And I didn't notice that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't intentional. Like I actually sat down to draw each of these Sophia images and just started drawing. I didn't have a plan. It was just sort of like a conscious, unconscious flow or whatever you call that, spontaneous writing, spontaneous drawing. And I mean, that insight that one of the trees is living and one is dead, and it's called suspended. So, you know, symbolically, she's suspended between life and death, you know, and isn't that how many of us experience life, right? So, I mean, that's art acting as communal centerpiece, right? So I found that very powerful. But about your question about um how art is helping people, I hear from people, I get a lot of hate, yeah, I do, but I hear from people every day who are just so grateful for my art, in helping them through their deconstruction, you know, questioning their beliefs or changing their relationship to their religion or their church or whatever, and how it's helped them. LGBTQIA plus people who reach out and say, I just feel I need to thank you because your art helps me feel accepted and loved and validated and affirmed and understood and seen. And, you know, that to me is, you know, when I sit down in the morning to draw a cartoon, I try to draw a new cartoon every day. I'm not thinking, how am I going to change the world today in one simple drawing? No, that's not how I approach it. I just say, I'm going to draw what I'm feeling right now. And I draw it and I put it up. I have no idea if it's going to be liked or if it's not going to be liked. I just sort of I think of the sower who just throws out the seed and don't know where it's going to land. But I put my cartoon up and I see what's going to happen. And sometimes they fall flat, but sometimes they resonate with so many people out there. And um, it means a lot to me when they do, because I hear from these people who feel that they've been seen and understood and loved, and that it's possible even that they can be loved. And that to me means the world.
Well, and circling back, right, Henry's book, The Wounded Healer,
Mm,
you've been wounded in institutional church.
yeah.
And I don't want to project onto your story, but it might be fair to say religious trauma is part of your story. Would that
Hmm.
be fair to
Hmm.
say? It's
Hmm.
part of my story.
Yep.
Um, and I think you are taking that woundedness and offering it to those who are wounded in similar ways, and um, bringing your belovedness into the process. I think it's just ironic, but sort of hilarious that, you thought you were going to be this heady biblical scholar, and now you're, creating art from your heart on a
Yeah.
daily basis, sometimes deliberately trying to not be too heady at all, just kind of letting the art flow.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny, af after after yeah, we'd been married a while and I'd done all my studies and all this kind of thing. And I was at the University of Toronto and going to starting to pursue my PhD in New Testament studies. And what happened there was we ended up getting pregnant and then couldn't afford to continue. And the easy way out was I was offered a student pastoral charge, and I took it to save, to save my family basically from extreme poverty. And so I ended up becoming a student pastor, and then that I was on a new track all of a sudden. But I was at home visiting my mom and my family, my mom and dad, and I came across my old yearbook from when I graduated from high school.
mm,
And I didn't do well in math and all that stuff. I had to go to summer school every year, every summer, for math and things like that. I sucked, but in art and music, I excelled. And I was looking through the yearbook and I was seeing how I was in this band, I was in that band, and then that at the back of the book, all my friends were writing in there, one day we're going to hear you on the radio, or one day we're going to see your art hanging here or there, and blah, 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 going on. And I got so angry at myself
mm,
that I threw out my yearbook. I threw it, I threw it out because I obviously had somewhere along the line gotten derailed from my
mm,
creativity and was chose to live in my head.
mm,
And here I was reading about how musical I was and how artistic I was and my art and my music and blah 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 going on, and I what that wasn't me anymore, I thought.
mm, mm,
And it took some crises,
mm,
some moments in my life to get me back in touch with my creative self,
mm,
and to see that it's not either or,
mhm, mhm,
that you can be creative and smart too.
mhm,
you can be you can be an intellectual and creative. You can be a writer and an artist. You can be a speaker and an artist. You can read Greek if you want and be an artist. Like it, so it was sort of that binary thinking
mhm,
that got me in trouble. And when I began to feel compelled to become more of an individuated, integrated person, I do try to write thoughtful stuff, but also I'm a creative. I'm a creator, and I love how this has all turned out. And it's like with Henri Nouwen and I think of other Thomas Merton, he even got into making art with his sort of Zen style ink drawings and stuff. And like, I think that's a powerful mixture that was inspired by people like Henry Nouwen and Thomas Merton and so on.
Well, and their dogged determination
Mhm.
to release and reveal and live out of their truest self.
Mhm.
That truly the path of vocation for Henry um, was that, even more than being a Catholic priest, though he took that vocation incredibly seriously and
Right.
maintained his vows through his life, um, sometimes at great struggle. The vocation actually to be the beloved of God is the deepest and truest vocation.
Mhm.
And I think as I've been following your art all these years, uh, I think it comes out of that place that somewhere David Hayward knows that he's the beloved.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
ask
Thank
every
you.
guest this as we conclude our conversation, and that is what spiritual practices help sustain you in your life, but also help you to flourish? You've mentioned a few already in this conversation. Coffee? No, I'm kidding. But what are some of the practices, as original or innovative or creative or whatever they may be? What keeps you grounded and flourishing?
Well, that's the word, grounded. Um, my uh, my struggle has been, I'm realizing now throughout my life, has been to be present.
Mm,
And it's really dawned on me even more so. And even my wife Lisa's once in a while, like, where are you right now?
mm, mhm,
Meaning, I've drifted off or I'm not
mhm,
not present. And so I make that my practice now is to just be in my body.
mhm,
And so I'm, like breathing and cold showers and exercising and not not drifting off, being present in the conversation. Um, that to me is my biggest spiritual challenge
mm,
is to be in my body because spirituality, one of the biggest dangers of spirituality is it can be antibody and
mhm,
anti-grounded. And so for me, it's my struggle is the opposite, is
mhm,
to be in my body totally
mhm, mhm,
and to be present and to feel and to enjoy and to love and to touch and so like when I go for a run, I don't have plugs in or anything. I just take in the wind and the birds and the traffic and everything. I just try to be totally present and to be here now. Um, as Ram Dass said, or Eckhart Tolle, and all these guys, they're all and women, they're all saying the same thing: is to be present in your body. And I was reading a book recently on tantric sex. This is a little bit of a bunny trail, but um, the whole point of it is to be present. That's the whole point. That's all it's about, is just being totally present in your body at every moment and not fantasizing or drifting off. It's just being totally present and being here now. So that's you know, that's my answer is just to be present. And everything I do or try to do, that my practice is to just to be here now.
mhm. Thank you. It just sounds so incarnational in a way,
Yeah,
right?
incarnational is a perfect word. Yes.
We uh, we are in divine union with the one who took on flesh and moved into our neighborhood.
Yeah, but the danger of that, in my opinion, is when we think it's somehow spirit embodying like a container,
Mm,
where for me it's they are intricately
mhm,
interwoven. You cannot separate them.
mhm.
I was just reading a book on by Alex Hutchinson called Endurance, and he studying and doing all the research going on in endurance running and
Mm,
adventure, like long expeditions to the North Pole, or all these kinds of things, and what gives us endurance, what makes it happen.
mm,
Genetics, muscle, air, fuel, practice, mind control, what is it? And he basically comes to the conclusion that the mind and body are one thing, and that they both affect and influence each other. And so that to me was just another reminder that applies spiritually as well, that being totally present, being here now in my body is spiritual practice.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love that commingling.
Yeah.
Um, and it seems to me that, art is creation, right? Like we actually have to use our bodies
Yes.
to
Yeah.
be in the creative process.
Yeah.
And so that perhaps for some of us who don't think we're very creative or don't think we're artsy, uh, that connectivity of our full being in the creative process can
Hmm.
really become that place of connection, especially if we're a bit stale or a bit dry in some of the other typical practices that we've been
Hmm.
faithful in for a long time. Sometimes it is something like the arts that can open a new pathway for us.
Exactly. I agree.
David, it's been wonderful to have this conversation with you. Thanks for sharing about your encounter with Henri
Yeah.
and the pursuit of your truest self, which has really offered a great gift of your art to the rest of us who have followed the Naked Pastor. If you have never heard of the Naked Pastor, we're going to have David's art and his website and everything in the show notes for this episode, so check that out. And again, if you're new to the Henri Nouwen Society, we'd invite you to look at henrinouwen.org, sign up for those daily meditations, and never ever forget, you truly are the beloved of God. Thanks for being with us. If you've been enjoying the Love Henri podcast, let me encourage you to consider doing two things. First, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And secondly, we'd be so grateful if you would consider donating to the Henri Nouwen Society so that we can continue to offer free resources to encourage people all around the world in their spiritual journeys. Head over to henrinouwen.org to subscribe and donate today. Thank you so much.